It happened on a warm September evening beneath the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. For years, Marc Delaine had made his living scamming strangers with the old guess the ball under the cup trick. It was just another night of small deceptions until a man with no shoes and a calm, unreadable face stepped out from the crowd and placed a single coin on the table. He guessed right once, twice, 3 times in a row. Impossible, even for luck. The crowd swelled around them, phones recording, the air electric with disbelief. And then, when Marc lifted the final cup, expecting to reveal his own trick, what happened next stunned every tourist in the square. What they saw that night would change not only Marc's life, but the faith of everyone who witnessed it. Before we continue, please tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now where you are. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. And if you are ready to hear this story, please like this video. It helps more people hear stories of faith and hope around the world. September 3rd, 2022. Early evening in Paris. The crowds under the Eiffel Tower were thick, moving in slow waves between food stalls and souvenir carts. The air smelled of roasted peanuts, crepes, and hot metal from the railings that baked in the sun all afternoon. Marc Delaine, 42 years old, dragged his worn backpack to a familiar spot near the edge of the Champ de Mars walkway, just far enough from the main police routes. He set down a square of flattened cardboard, bent stiffly from his bad back, and arranged 3 scratched metal cups in a perfect row. The edges were dented, polished from use. He took out the red rubber ball, rolled it between his fingers, felt its tacky surface, and breathed out once before the show began. He had done this for 5 years straight, nearly every day that the weather allowed it. The cup game was his job now. Not a performance, not magic, a scam, pure and simple. Tourists called it the shell game, but there was no game to win. Marc always kept the ball hidden, sometimes in his hand, sometimes up his sleeve, depending on the crowd's angle. When someone guessed right, it was only because he let them. When they guessed wrong, which they almost always did, he smiled and pocketed the coins. The police knew his face by now. He'd been chased, fined, warned, but he always came back because this was the only thing that still worked for him. Alain stood nearby pretending to be a curious tourist, cigarette behind his ear, ready to win a few times to bait real players. Benoit kept his distance, leaning against a railing, pretending to sell keychains while keeping watch for the uniforms. It was a quiet system, one they'd built after years of running. The first customers were easy. A couple from Italy lost 10 euros in 3 minutes. A family from Denmark laughed after losing 5. The noise around them swallowed any guilt Marc might have felt. Coins clinked, the cups slid, the rhythm held steady. It felt like control, and control was the one thing he thought he still had left. Then someone stepped forward who didn't belong. A man, barefoot, clothes layered and faded, hair long and uneven, like it hadn't seen scissors in months. He walked slowly, not like a drunk or a beggar, but like someone who knew exactly where he was going. People noticed him without meaning to. He stopped in front of Marc's table and placed a single 1 euro coin on the cardboard. The sound of the coin hitting the box was small, but it cut through the noise. Marc looked up, confused. "You want to play?" he said. The man nodded once. His face was calm, almost peaceful. The hands that set down the coin were rough, scarred, but steady. Marc shrugged and started the shuffle. His hands moved with practiced speed. He lifted 1 cup, showing the ball for a second, then set it down and slid them in wide arcs. Left, right, middle, right again. He could do it blindfolded. He palmed the ball on the last pass, letting it disappear from the table completely. "All right," he said, forcing a grin. "Where is it?" The man pointed to the left cup. Marc hesitated, confident it was empty. But when he lifted it, the red ball sat there. He froze for half a second, enough for Alain to notice. Alain looked uneasy, but the crowd clapped, thinking it was luck. Marc laughed it off, pretending nothing had happened. "Good eyes," he said. "Try again?" The man nodded. Marc reset the ball, moving faster now, his fingers a blur. Again he lifted it once, showed it, then made it vanish into his palm. He made sure the table was clear, no ball in sight. The man's eyes didn't follow the cups at all. They were on Marc's face the whole time. "Go on," Marc said, his voice sharper. The man pointed to the right cup. Marc flipped it over fast, ready to show it empty, but the ball was there again. Gasps came from a few tourists. Someone whispered, "He's good." A woman pulled out her phone to record. Marc felt the heat crawl up his neck. He forced a laugh. "All right, let's make it fair. Double or nothing." He began to move the cups faster than most could follow, his palms sweating now. He made the ball vanish again, absolutely sure this time it stayed in his fist. His pulse beat loud in his ears. The man waited calmly until Marc stopped. Then he pointed to the middle cup. Marc smirked, ready to prove the trick. He lifted the cup with confidence and froze. The red ball rolled out gently onto the cardboard, bumping against the rim. He opened his fist under the table and felt the second one there, identical. His hand trembled. He looked up. The man's eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "You only lose what isn't yours," he said softly. Marc's mouth went dry. "What did you say?" "You heard me," the man replied. The crowd laughed, unaware of what was happening in Marc's chest. He'd been caught before, but this was different. His fingers still held the hidden ball. The one on the table shouldn't exist. He swept it up quickly, pocketed the coins, trying to end it. "Game's over," he muttered. The man didn't move. "Then stop running," he said. Marc stared, trying to speak, but a siren rose somewhere nearby. Benoit whistled low from the distance, the signal. Alain hissed, "Police! They're coming this way!" Marc grabbed the cups, stuffing them into his bag. When he looked up again, the man was already turning away, walking calmly through the scattering crowd. 2 police officers crossed the plaza, shouting for everyone to clear the path. Marc ducked his head, pretending to adjust his bag. One of the officers recognized him, pointed, and began walking over. Alain disappeared into the mass of tourists. Benoit slipped behind a vendor cart. Marc stayed still, pretending innocence, his heart hammering. The officers lectured him briefly, told him to move along, and left to chase another group closer to the bridge. By the time Marc exhaled, the barefoot man had vanished completely. The crowd returned to normal, laughter and chatter filling the air again. He bent down to pack the rest of his things, unsteady. When he lifted the last cup, the red ball was gone again. He sighed, half angry, half relieved, thinking maybe it rolled under the table. He looked down. It sat beside his shoe, clean and dry, glowing faintly in the dim light. Marc bent, picked it up, and for a second swore he felt warmth pulsing through it. Not heat from the sun, something softer, steady, alive. He closed his hand around it and froze, listening to the distant hum of the city and the sound of his own heartbeat sinking with it. Alain reappeared, brushing off his jacket. "You good?" he asked. Marc nodded slowly, not trusting his own voice. "Yeah," he said at last, "just another lucky fool." They walked off toward the bridge, the sky now darkening to deep blue, the tower lights flickering to life behind them. Marc didn't look back, but something in him knew the man was still nearby, somewhere in the crowd, and that this night had just become the first he would never forget. The next morning, the square under the tower looked the same as always, crowded, noisy, the air full of shouts, music, and the smell of roasted nuts. But for Marc, everything felt slightly tilted, like the whole world had moved a few degrees without telling him. He woke late, his back aching as usual, and for a long time sat at the edge of his bed, turning the red ball over in his palm. He had checked it again and again the night before, convinced there had to be a second one hidden somewhere in his things. But there wasn't. Just the one. Smooth, weightless, ordinary. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of that warmth he'd felt when he first picked it up off the pavement. By noon, he was back under the tower with Alain and Benoit. Alain was smoking, making jokes about the Barefoot magician. Benoit laughed too, but didn't sound convinced. "The guy didn't look right," he muttered. "Not a beggar, not a tourist. The way he stared, like he knew something." Marc told him to shut up and get to work, though the words came out harsher than he meant. They spread out, same as always, setting up near the bridge where the afternoon crowds were thickest. The first few rounds went smoothly. People laughed, coins changed hands, the rhythm returned. For a while, Marc almost forgot. Then, around 4 o'clock, he saw the man again, standing across the walkway near a group of painters, barefoot as before, watching quietly. Marc's stomach tightened. He told himself to ignore it, to keep shuffling, but his hands began to move faster without meaning to. When the man started walking toward him, Alain caught the look on Marc's face and whispered, "Don't start anything, not today." The man stopped 2 meters away and placed another coin on the table. Same soft sound, same steady eyes. Marc's voice came out dry. "You again." The man didn't answer. He just waited. Marc slid the cups, smooth, fast, making sure to palm the ball perfectly this time. No mistakes. He knew where it was, the middle one. He stopped, forced a smile. "All right, show me." The man pointed to the left cup. Marc lifted it. Empty. "Wrong," he said quickly, relief spilling out as a half laugh. But the man raised a finger slowly and pointed to Marc's closed fist. "You still think it's all in your hands?" Marc froze. He hadn't told anyone where he kept the ball. He opened his palm. Empty. He stared, then dropped to check the table. The red ball was sitting neatly under the left cup, exactly where the man had pointed. He looked up, his voice shaking. "How are you doing that?" The man's expression didn't change. "You already know how. You just don't know who's watching." Before Marc could answer, Alain hissed, "Police!" 2 officers had turned the corner, scanning the crowd. Benoit whistled low, their signal to move. Marc swept the cups and coins into his bag, kicked the cardboard aside, and bolted down the steps toward the river. The officers shouted something behind him. He ran through a group of tourists, nearly tripping, his bad back screaming with each step. The man didn't follow. He just stood there, calm, hands at his sides, as if he'd been expecting the whole scene. Marc kept running, weaving through the pillars beneath Pont d'Iéna until the sounds behind him faded. He ducked into an alley beside a cafe, panting, his hands shaking. The rain from the night before had left puddles that reflected the tower upside down. He leaned against a wall, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the red ball. It was warm again, not from running. It was the same quiet heat, like a pulse that wasn't his. He threw it against the ground in anger, watched it bounce once, twice, then roll toward the river's edge. When he looked up, the barefoot man was standing at the other end of the alley, raincoat draped loosely over one arm. No one else was around. Marc stepped back, heart hammering. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The man didn't move closer. His voice was steady. "To see what you do when no one's looking." Marc's throat tightened. "Leave me alone." The man nodded slowly. "I will, when you stop running." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the street traffic without a sound. Marc stayed there until the light faded, not sure how long. He finally went home after dark, climbing the narrow stairs to his small apartment. He flicked on the light and froze. The red ball sat on his kitchen table. He hadn't brought it back. He knew he hadn't. He sank into the chair, staring at it. He thought about calling Alain or Benoit, but what would he say? That some barefoot man was haunting him? That a toy ball could follow him home? He laughed once, the kind of laugh that doesn't feel like laughter at all, then covered his face with his hands. By the next morning, word had spread among the street vendors that a barefoot man had been walking around warning tourists not to gamble. Some said he carried a small Bible, others that he spoke different languages. A few swore he had been talking about truth and forgiveness. Marc tried to act uninterested, but his pulse quickened when he heard the stories. That evening he went out again, telling himself he'd just watch, maybe see if the man appeared near someone else. He stood in the crowd near the tower, blending in. The lights began to sparkle at 9 o'clock, that hourly glitter that made everyone stop and stare. He thought he was imagining it, but in the reflection on a souvenir stall's glass, he saw a figure standing behind him. Barefoot, calm, eyes fixed straight ahead. Marc turned fast. No one was there, only the hum of the crowd and the glow of the tower washing the pavement silver. He left early, walking toward the bridge, his hands deep in his pockets, fingers pressed against the smooth, round shape he didn't remember picking up again. 2 days later, Paris woke to the sound of rain. It started before dawn and didn't stop, turning the Champ de Mars into a mirror of puddles and gray light. The city looked washed out, stripped of its color. Marc didn't plan to work that day. The rain usually kept tourists away, but habit dragged him outside anyway. He told himself it was only to meet Benoit for coffee, to talk about finding a new spot where the police wouldn't bother them. Yet as he crossed the bridge, bag slung over his shoulder, the weight of the cups clinking inside, he knew he'd end up setting up somewhere again. It was what he did. What else could he do? The sky hung low and heavy when he reached the cafe near the tower. Benoit sat under the awning, smoking and frowning at the rain. "You're out of your mind," he said. "No one's playing in this weather." Marc shrugged. "Maybe a few will. Tourists never stop." Benoit gave a tired laugh. "You're the only one who believes that." Alain hadn't shown up since the police chase. He'd texted once, "Done with it, find another fool," and disappeared. Marc didn't blame him. Still, he unpacked the cups. They were cold against his hands. He sat up under the edge of the awning where people could pass without getting drenched. Every few minutes he wiped the table dry, waiting for a chance to start. Around noon, a young couple stopped, smiling, curious. Marc went through the motions, his voice flat but confident, the red ball clicking between the cups. They lost, laughed, handed over €5, and walked off arm in arm. For a while, that small bit of normalcy steadied him. Then, as he reached for his coffee, he saw movement through the curtain of rain. A figure crossing the street barefoot, head uncovered, soaked to the skin, walking straight toward him. Marc's chest tightened. Benoit noticed too and muttered, "That's him, isn't it?" The man stopped a few feet away, water dripping from his hair, eyes calm as before. He didn't speak. He simply looked at the table, then at Marc, then placed a single coin, again, on the cardboard. Marc stood frozen, hand on the cup. "You're following me now?" he asked, his voice sharp. The man said quietly, "You're the one who keeps showing up." Benoit took a step back. "I'm not part of this," he muttered, flicking away his cigarette. "Marc, just pack it up. Let's go." Marc ignored him. He wanted answers. He wanted logic. He moved the cups faster than before, the sound of metal against cardboard drowned by rain. He made the ball vanish flawlessly into his palm, hidden. "All right," he said, almost daring him. "If you're so smart, find it." The man lifted the first cup, empty, then the second, empty again. He didn't look at Marc when he said softly, "It's in your hand." Marc clenched his fist, determined to prove him wrong, and opened it. Nothing. His palm was empty. He blinked in disbelief and quickly turned the third cup. The red ball rolled out, wet but glowing faintly under the awning's dim light. The man didn't smile. He just said, You can't hide truth in mud. Marc's voice cracked. What are you doing to me? I'm not doing anything, the man said. You are. Benoit grabbed Marc's arm. Let's go. Police are around again. The same two officers were walking up the street, their boots splashing in puddles. The barefoot man stepped back as if to make room. Marc, caught between fear and rage, shoved the cups into his bag and ran. He didn't even wait for Benoit. He just ran. He turned down the next street, slipping on the wet pavement, heart pounding. The rain blurred everything, people, cars, the tower lights beginning to flicker through the fog. He ducked beneath another awning and leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He took the ball from his pocket. It was warm again, even in the cold rain. He hurled it into the street as hard as he could, watching it bounce and roll into a puddle, then disappear down the gutter. He stood there shaking, soaked, furious. Enough, he said aloud. You're not real. Maybe you're not, said a voice behind him. Marc spun around. The barefoot man was standing there again, rain running down his face, his clothes clinging to his skin. His eyes were steady, but softer now, almost kind. Marc backed up until his shoulder hit the wall. How are you doing this? Who are you? The man stepped closer, only a pace away. You know who I am, he said quietly. Marc shook his head violently. No, you're some street freak trying to mess with me. The man tilted his head, studying him. Then why are you afraid? Marc wanted to run but couldn't. The rain slowed. The sounds around them seemed distant, muffled. The man looked down at Marc's shaking hands and said, You learned to take because you forgot how to ask. Marc's breath came fast. Ask what? For help, the man said simply. Then he reached into his coat and held out the red ball, perfectly dry. Marc stared at it. I threw that away. I know. The man placed it in his palm again, closing Marc's fingers around it. When you stop running, you'll hear me. Before Marc could say another word, a shout echoed from the street. Police! Move! The officers were closer now, yelling at vendors to clear the sidewalk. Marc turned to look, and when he turned back, the man was gone. No footprints, no sound of retreat. Nothing. Just the rain hitting the pavement again. He walked aimlessly for hours after that, through side streets and empty courtyards, not caring where he ended up. He didn't go home. He couldn't. He wandered past the river, over the bridge, past tourists huddled under umbrellas. Every time lightning flashed, he thought he saw the man's outline in the distance, standing still, waiting. When dawn began to gray the sky, he found himself on the steps of Saint-Pierre-du-Gros-Caillou, the small church near the tower he used to pass every night without looking. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet stone and morning. He sat on the steps, holding the ball in his hands, and for the first time in years, he didn't want to play the game anymore. He didn't even want to move. He just wanted to breathe and understand why that simple thing, a stranger in the rain, felt heavier than everything else in his life put together. The morning came gray and trembling after a night that felt endless. The air still smelled of rain, and the streets near the Champ de Mars shone like mirrors. Marc sat on the steps of Saint-Pierre-du-Gros-Caillou, motionless, soaked to the bone, the red ball turning slowly in his palm. He hadn't slept. His mind was still replaying the sound of the barefoot man's voice, the quiet certainty of it. When you stop running, you'll hear me. The words repeated in his head with every breath. His back ached, his fingers shook, his clothes clung to him, but he couldn't bring himself to move. It was as if the city itself had paused to listen. Then, from inside the church, he heard a faint sound. Footsteps, the slow striking of metal on stone, and finally, the deep tone of a bell. He rose unsteadily, pushed the heavy wooden door open, and stepped inside. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of wax and candle smoke. A few parishioners were already there, an old woman whispering prayers, a man lighting candles near the altar, a young volunteer arranging chairs for the noon service. Marc stood near the entrance, unsure what to do with himself. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed softly, like a seal on the end of something. He walked to the back pew, sat down, and rubbed his hands together, trying to bring warmth back into them. The red ball rolled off his knee and onto the floor. It didn't bounce, it just settled quietly near his shoe, as if it belonged there. He picked it up and set it beside him. The motion felt oddly final, like setting down a weapon after too many years of carrying it. A priest approached him after a few minutes. He was an older man with kind eyes and the tired, grounded look of someone who had seen more than he could ever explain. He carried a small notebook and a cup of coffee. "You look like you've been out all night," he said softly. Marc nodded, not trying to hide it. The priest sat beside him, not close, not far. "Do you need help?" Marc thought about lying, but found he didn't have the energy. "Maybe," he said. The priest waited. Silence stretched between them, the kind that doesn't demand an answer but allows one to appear if it wants to. Marc started talking before he even knew what words he was using. He told him about the street game, the money, the chases, and the barefoot man who kept finding him. He tried to laugh halfway through to make it sound less insane, but his voice cracked instead. The priest didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't question. He just listened, nodding now and then, letting Marc empty himself of everything he'd been holding. When Marc fell silent, the priest looked down at the red ball on the bench between them. He reached out and turned it once with his fingers, as if testing its weight, then said quietly, "You know, there's something about truth. It never disappears when we stop believing in it. It waits." He opened the notebook, thumbed through the pages, and read softly, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The words didn't sound rehearsed, they sounded lived. Marc stared ahead, throat tight. "What if I don't deserve that?" he asked. The priest closed the notebook. "You don't have to deserve it. You only have to want it." He stood and pointed toward a side door that led to the parish hall. "Come help us for a bit. We're serving lunch today. You'll feel better when you work." Marc hesitated, then followed. Inside the hall, volunteers moved quickly, setting tables, unpacking loaves of bread, and stirring large metal pots of soup. The air was thick with steam and the smell of onions and broth. Someone handed him an apron, and he put it on without thinking. For hours, he worked in silence, unloading boxes, carrying trays, wiping tables, refilling cups. He had no plan, no expectation, but his hands kept moving, and somehow that was enough. The line of people who came in for food was long. Marc saw faces marked by cold, hunger, and fatigue, some young, some old, none proud. They ate slowly, some whispering thanks, others too tired to speak. When the last bowl was served, he leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from his forehead. The priest came over, handed him a cup of coffee, and smiled faintly. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Marc nodded, his chest full but light. Then across the hall by the far door, he saw him, the barefoot man. Clean now, wearing a plain shirt, his hair dry, his face calm. He stood near the line of tables, holding a tray, talking quietly to an older woman. The light from the window fell across his shoulders, and for a moment Marc couldn't move. He stepped forward slowly, whispering, "Hey." But the man turned, smiled gently, and set his tray down. When Marc reached the spot, he was gone. Only the red ball sat on the table, perfectly dry, shining faintly under the light. Marc picked it up, closed his hand around it, and pressed it to his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. He just stood there breathing, surrounded by the quiet clatter of dishes and the sound of a radio playing softly in another room. That evening, when the hall emptied and the city began to glow again outside, Marc found himself sweeping the floor. He wasn't asked to stay, he just did. When the priest passed by locking doors, he asked, "Will you come again tomorrow?" Marc looked up. "Yeah," he said, "tomorrow." Weeks passed. He started fixing things around the church, benches, railings, broken tiles, little tasks that kept his hands busy. He stopped counting days. His life became quieter, but not smaller. Each morning he arrived early to light candles. Each evening he stayed late to blow them out. He kept the red ball on a shelf beside his bed, beside a small prayer card the priest had given him. It wasn't magic, it was just a reminder, something honest that asked for nothing. Sometimes he walked back to the tower after work, past the same square where everything had started. The new scammers were there now, different faces, same tricks, same shouting. He'd pause for a moment, watch the tourists laugh and lose their coins, then turn away. The police sirens still came sometimes, the crowd still scattered, but for Marc it all felt distant, like watching an old movie of a life that no longer fit. He had learned something simple but heavy. Truth doesn't arrive in the thunder of miracles. It comes in the smallest moments, in a stranger's voice, a borrowed towel, a bowl of soup served without pride. And maybe grace isn't about winning or losing. Maybe it's just the moment we stop hiding and finally let the light touch what we've been ashamed of for too long. Let us pray for those who still hide from grace, for those who live in cycles of deceit and despair, believing they are too far gone. Let us pray for the hands that steal because they've forgotten how to build, for the hearts that lie because they've forgotten how to hope, and for the weary souls who chase coins when they were made for love. May the light that found Marc find them too. May it reach the ones sitting alone tonight who don't know how to ask for help. May every false thing in them dissolve in the quiet truth that never stops waiting. May forgiveness find its way into the places that feel beyond saving until peace returns to the lives that need it most. Amen. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to think about where you've been running and what grace might already be waiting for you. Write in the comments what part of this story touched your heart most. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And tell us if you've ever met a stranger who changed you without saying much at all. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Sometimes God doesn't shout through miracles. Sometimes He just stands quietly in the rain, waiting for us to turn around.